From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Heart disease causes 1 out of every 5 deaths in the United States. Now, a University of Colorado researcher says she's found promising clues that could help treat it, but the source of her discoveries might make your skin crawl. Dr. Leslie Leinwand is a professor of molecular, cellular, and developmental biology at CU Boulder. Her insights come from research conducted on a rather unwieldy animal to keep in your laboratory, pythons. Leslie and her team observe Burmese pythons and ball pythons as the snakes go weeks between meals without eating.
Their fasting periods are 28 days in a controlled laboratory setting. And then we feed them a meal that's equal to about 25% of its body mass.
Leslie has studied pythons for decades, and she recently published a new paper on her research. She says that yes, humans and snakes have very different physiologies, but it turns out the way pythons eat in the wild, one gigantic meal whenever they can find it, may inspire new treatments for heart disease and other metabolic conditions in people.
They are opportunistic predators, these pythons, and so they will eat whenever they can. And sometimes that could be as long as a year or even 2 between meals.
Whoa.
Which is in itself hugely interesting that nothing bad happens to them. And they are not hibernating, they're just not eating. And so we call that fasting.
Right.
But when they do eat a meal, it can be equal to or even greater than their own body mass.
That's incredible.
Now, you can imagine how much energy it takes to digest such a gigantic meal. So basically, the python, when it's taking in a meal and it begins to digest it, its metabolism goes through the roof. And the analogy I like to think about is that it's like a horse running a Kentucky Derby, except for 6 to 7 to 8 days straight.
Ooh.
So that's phenomenal by itself. But what happens when it increases its metabolism is that most of the organs in the body can do as much as a doubling in size. And they do that by growing new tissue, which is, it's not that they're swelling up with fluid, they actually build new tissue.
Okay.
And then once the meal is digested, they go right back down to their more dormant state or fasting state. This kind of reversible organ growth and then what we call regression or shrinking back down are processes that would be potentially helpful in people. And the reason that I say that is that sometimes a big heart in somebody who, for example, has chronic hypertension, that is really bad for you. In contrast, if you're a highly conditioned athlete, like many people are in Boulder, you can end up getting a really big heart, but in a good way.
Yeah.
And so if we could figure out how the snake does this in 24 hours, it would be really quite phenomenal to be able to translate that to mammals or potentially humans.
Leslie's research gets pretty complicated, but basically she spent years investigating the plasma in a python's blood, which helps the snake's heart expand and grow strong between meals and ultimately return to normal. Then she investigated whether that python plasma could be used to help a mammal's heart grow. And when her team tried it on mice, it worked. Now she wants to investigate how to use the elements from python plasma to ultimately create a treatment that could help human hearts that are stiffened from heart disease, after lots of thorough testing, of course.
So the next step would be hopefully to partner with some pharmaceutical company to try to make a sick heart better.
I think it's incredible what their organs can do. But Leslie, I have to say, I cannot even imagine what it's like to go to work with and handle these very large reptiles. What are some of the challenges in using pythons in the lab?
There were so many challenges that I have to tell you, if I had known how hard this was going to be, I might not have started this project, but I'm so glad that we did. Luckily, CU had a couple of reptile physiologists on their faculty. And so I went downstairs and asked a guy, I said, can we keep some pythons in your facility? And he was so thrilled that there was somebody else working on reptiles that he said, sure. And so the challenges include a lot of people have real phobias about snakes. And so, for example, initially we had to take care of the snakes ourselves because the animal caretakers either were uncomfortable or scared and didn't want to take care of them.
Understandable.
When the snakes arrived, though, I was thinking to myself, what have I done? Because they showed up in a box with holes poked in the sides, and all 18 of these snakes were in a pillowcase. And so
What?
I picked up this pillowcase out of this sort of container, and all these snakes are writhing around.
Oh my
And that was when I thought, oh,
what did I get myself into?
Exactly. So we had more than just one of those moments. We had multiple moments like that. But everything we learned was something new. So it was incredibly exciting because people had studied snake behavior and sort of ecology issues, but people really hadn't done what we have since done, which is to really take this down to a sort of molecular level analysis.
I know these types of pythons can grow up to 16 feet long. Have you ever felt like you're in danger working with one in the lab?
No. I mean, none of ours ever have gotten that long. But I will say we do grow them sometimes to, 7 or 8 feet long. And those snakes are huge. And they're really, really strong because they're just one big muscle. And so, I mean, they have other organs too, but most of their body mass is made up of their skeletal muscle.
Sure. They're heavy.
Yeah. And, we buy them as babies. And so they're really quite cute. They'll wrap around your wrist and squeeze it. They're not venomous, so that's not a concern, but they are constrictors. And so we don't walk around with them around our necks or shoulders or anything like that.
That could end badly, right? Because they eat anything.
Yep. Yes. And if they've been fasted, we smell like food to them.
Right. What kinds of things do you feed to the pythons in your lab?
Mice and rats.
All right. I have to say it feels strange to think about using reptiles in medical research for humans. How unusual is this in our search for better health in people?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question because of the rage that is surrounding these GLP-1 agonists or things that activate it.
Okay.
Otherwise known as Ozempic and Byetta, and that was from Gila Monster. Yes, and that was from Gila Monster saliva.
Huh.
And as you probably know, it was developed for treating type 2 diabetes, which it does pretty well. An unintended side effect, however, was this massive weight loss that people on commercials are talking about, this injectable thing. And that came from Gila Monsters.
Dr. Leslie Leinwand is a professor of molecular, cellular, and developmental biology at CU Boulder. She noted that in addition to pythons and Gila monsters, there are a number of animals whose bodies do extraordinary things that might help us treat human diseases in new ways. We'll include a link to some of Leslie's research in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thank you so much for listening.